Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by the good people at CACI, the Center for American Culture and Ideas. So, Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
I want to talk about artificial intelligence. It's astounding to me. I've used it in the past, and I stopped using it, and I started using it again. And I can't help but think, and I don't want to go overboard here, but I think what I'm about to say is correct, that we're standing on the cusp of something of the magnitude of the Industrial Revolution or the Internet Revolution. Anybody who says, well, AI is going to be good for the following things, ABC, has too limited a view of artificial intelligence. I honestly think this is like trying to talk to entrepreneurs back in the days of the horse and buggy and describe an automobile and expect them to anticipate things like drive-through McDonald's and Jiffy Lube and commuting and the whole business. I think AI is going to bring about things that we can't even imagine, and I think it's just maybe 5 or 10 years down the road.
Do you sense it makes us all richer and happier, or do you sense it makes us all terrified and miserable?
Oh, no, I think it makes us amazingly richer and happier. I mean, look at what the internet did. You know, if you go back 25 years, the internet was nothing. You go back 30 years, and it literally didn't even exist. And look at what we do now and how many businesses are involved. One of the most valuable companies on the planet, Amazon, whose business model would not have existed were it not for the internet. And just that over the course of a couple of decades. I think we're looking at the same thing, and I don't think it's going to be a couple of decades. I think it's going to be one maximum.
Smart people right now are asking themselves, how can I invest in this? That's a hard question.
Yeah, that's a hard question, and I have no idea, but it's one question that people should be asking. The other question people should be asking, and they can come up with an answer to it, or at least an approximation, is what can I do to make myself more valuable in light of AI? I'm picturing a world in which AI replaces my job. I'm an analyst, I do this thing, AI replaces me. What good am I? I become even more valuable when I learn how to use it. So that in effect, I become a manager of AIs that are doing the job that I'm doing now. And to do that well, this is my experience messing with AI, you've got to know what to ask it. You have to ask it questions in such a way that you cover things that any other human being would just assume. For example, I asked the AI the other day, give me a forecast of interest rates for the next year. Now, if I had said that to you, you would have assumed I meant, okay, maybe mortgage rates or federal fund rates or something, and for the United States. I have to tell the AI explicitly this particular interest rate for the United States. And that's a very simple type of example, but I've been dealing with it where I have spent maybe an hour crafting the question specifically so that AI gives me the answer I'm looking for. And you've got to know that the answer you're getting back is a reasonable answer or not a reasonable answer. So in some sense, at least in my field, you're never going to replace someone like me who has a deep knowledge of statistical analysis, because I'm the guy who's going to be able to say, yeah, the AI's got it right here, or you've asked the right questions, the answer you're getting is actually relevant to your problem. AI can't make that judgment because it doesn't understand your problem. It only understands the question you pose to it.
And which versions of AI have you been using?
I've been using 4, ChatGPT, which people who mess around with AI a lot say that's probably the best one currently.
You just said you used 4.
Yes, ChatGPT 4.
Oh, okay.
No, not 4 AI.
You see, you've got to ask the right question, apparently. Because the thing answering the question might not be that bright. All right. Well, I mean, look, this is all interesting stuff. I haven't used it much. It doesn't really fit into my life in the same way it fits into yours. I think it will. I just think it doesn't. I'm going to say something very strange this weekend. Joe Biden did a good thing.
What do you do?
He pardoned more people who had been convicted of certain federal marijuana crimes.
Really? That's excellent. How many?
That I don't know, but, the problem is always that. The vast majority of people who are in jail or who have criminal records because of marijuana convictions are at the state level. So most of what a president can do with the pardon power, right, it's going to be symbolic. Now, it's a good symbol. And he encouraged governors to follow his lead. Mm-hmm. And I think every governor in the United States should do that yesterday.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no reason for anybody to suffer because of a marijuana conviction. Indeed, there should be no such thing as a marijuana conviction. And we're left, with a very strange set of circumstances with marijuana where it's both legal and not legal at the same time. Logically speaking, X and not X cannot be simultaneously true. And we're going to have to come to terms with this, and we're going to have to address it. And I think the only way to address it is to throw up our hands and say, you know what? Go nuts with the marijuana people. We don't care anymore.
Yeah.
And that's an uncomfortable thing for a lot of people to say. I've never really understood why. Their arguments don't hold a lot of water in the end. And if I'm to take their arguments seriously, then we're going to have to go back to alcohol prohibition too.
Yeah.
Alcohol is an infinitely more dangerous drug than marijuana ever was. But nonetheless, I want to give a little bit of credit where it's due. And this is the second time Biden has pardoned a bunch of marijuana convicts.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was back in, I think, 2022, the last time he did it. We should find every reason to keep right on doing this sort of thing. There are people out there who really suffer for no good reason whatsoever. And I lump marijuana convictions into that category, no good reason.
Is it still illegal at the federal level?
Yeah. It's a Schedule 4 drug, right? It's in the same category as heroin, legally, at the federal level, which is just asinine, pure and simple.
I wonder how broad a president's pardoning powers are. Could he, for example, pardon ahead of time anybody who's, within certain bounds, who violates a federal marijuana law, in effect, overriding Congress?
I don't know the answer to that question. We should ask our friend Clark.
Yeah.
If the pardon power can extend into future crime. Something tells me no, but it wouldn't be the first time I was wrong about a technical question like that. So I'm going to take a pass on answering that question. I don't know.
I didn't do that.
For those of you wondering why there is dead silence here, Ant and I are on a Zoom call and there was just a thumbs up.
It came out like a thought bubble from James. I didn't do it.
I didn't do it either. And to test it, I gave Ant the finger and nothing happened. What other than that could be the perfect segue into the foolishness of the week, Ant? Here we are at the level of the federal government yet again. And when the federal government starts to make pronouncements about diet, hold on to the phone because something stupid is coming. Anybody who wants to take issue with what I'm saying right now, we're going to have to talk long and hard about the food pyramid and American obesity. And I think this is a related story to the food pyramid and obesity because the federal government is deciding at present, Ant, whether potatoes are going to continue being a vegetable.
Are we really spending our tax dollars on this?
Oh, yes. There are multiple agencies involved in this and all kinds of public interest groups, read lobbyists, all losing their minds over this. But the federal government is deciding right now if it's going to maybe, decide that potatoes are a grain.
A grain?
See, the problem with that is potatoes are not a grain, but that's not stopping anyone.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a botanist, but potatoes are a tuber. I don't know whether that makes them a vegetable or something else. I know that you can you make vodka out of potatoes, don't you?
You can. You could also make mashed potatoes out of potatoes.
No. My point is that alcohols like that, vodka, rum, you can make alcohol out of grains. rye,
and you
barley.
can make alcohol out of grapes and raisins if you want. I mean,
which are fruits, but I'm not aware of any alcohol that's made out of a vegetable, save perhaps vodka made out of the potato.
That's right. So we will all wait with bated breath for the federal government to come up with its new potato answer. And I'm just going to encourage everybody to ignore the federal government every time it talks about food, because it gets it wrong anyway. So why are we bothering?
Right. Under the old food pyramid, weren't we supposed to eat like a loaf of bread a day or something? There are 8 servings of grains.
Yeah. Cue up type 2 diabetes.
Before you leave this topic, I assume that this is a question at all because somewhere in the law, the federal government is handing out tax breaks or money or something to growers of grains. Hence, someone says, hello, a potato is a grain.
No, the potato people don't want potatoes to be grains. The potato people want potatoes to be vegetables. The grain people don't want potatoes to be grains. They want potatoes to be vegetables.
Nobody involved wants potatoes to be grains, and yet the federal government, some functionary somewhere said, oh, look, a potato, it's a grain.
Enter the federal government to f*** up everything.
Oh, my God.
We finally found one thing that everybody agrees on.
Except the one party that knows the least
right.
and has the least skin in the game anyway.
But has the most authority to do whatever it wants.
Right.
Stay tuned. We'll surely get back to this in the days, weeks, months, and years to come.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
And we're probably really late to this party, and we're really late to it for, I think, a bunch of perfectly good reasons. People probably lost interest in this a couple of weeks ago, given the way these things work. We're going to be talking today about those 3 college presidents who got hauled before Congress to talk about anti-Semitism and the nonsense going on their various campuses. And here I'm talking about Harvard's President Claudine Gay, former now University of Pennsylvania President Liz McGill, and MIT President Sally Kornbluth, all of whom were asked some rather pointed questions by members of Congress about the anti-Semitism on their various campuses and what, if anything, they could or should do about said behavior. Surely you remember seeing this on your TV, Ant.
I saw that they were hauled before Congress and that they said whatever they said and that they were in danger of losing their jobs now because of it. But that's as far as it went. I don't know what was going on. I don't know what it is that they said. I mean, I gather that there's anti-Semitism on campus, and I gather that, as is usual for university faculty and administrators, they likely put their feet in their mouths.
Well, that's to be determined. I think that's the takeaway that most people had. I'm not sure it's my takeaway, but we'll see. All 3 of them condemned anti-Semitism, so let's at least start there.
Okay.
It's not like the 3 of them said, hooray, anti-Semitism, let's have more of it. That's not what they said at all. Now, what did they say, and why is it that everybody got so very frustrated and upset with them? That's another question entirely. So the questioning went something like this. We see these demonstrations on your various campuses by a bunch of students who are claiming that there should be yet another genocide directed towards Israel and the Jews. What do you think about that? All right, well, what's the correct answer to that question?
Mm-hmm.
And when you see these silver spoon in mouth or other orifice children at these various schools gathering together to chant things like death to the Jews and what have you, that is morally blameworthy behavior. That is behavior that we should not tolerate as a nation. However, what behavior should we tolerate at the university level? Because I would hazard to guess we would all be willing to say we're anti-genocide as a moral principle. But we have another moral principle too, I think,
that free speech is very valuable and we're all pro-free speech. Well, what about when free speech is being exercised in favor of genocide? Well, now you've got two moral principles in conflict. Which one do you go with?
The Supreme Court's dealt with this in the past. Doesn't this qualify as hate speech?
Well, there is no such thing as hate speech, so I don't know where you're
No.
going
I'm sorry.
with
I've
this.
used the wrong term. Fighting words.
Yeah, fighting words. I don't know. Are they? I mean, that's the difficulty with fighting words, right?
Well, if you've got people calling on others to kill still other people, that seems to be the definition of fighting words, is it not?
But who's fighting? These people are venting their spleens, calling for the extermination of a bunch of people, and everybody's just saying, well, I guess that's what they're going to do. Let them do their stupid thing. And isn't that interesting? Now, I do see Jewish students saying things like, I don't feel safe here, and I don't feel like I can walk across campus. I don't feel like I could go to Hillel House, right? Things like this. All right, so they feel unsafe. Is that something we have to care about?
And certainly something the university needs to care about.
Well, is it? Because then anybody can claim, I don't feel safe, and they get a heckler's veto for everything.
Oh, I'm not saying they get a heckler's veto. I am saying this is something the university is going to care about. Now, whether it rises to the level of we're going to do something, that's another matter.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because across the country, I see all kinds of things at all kinds of colleges, and they may or may not be the same as we're going to see at Harvard, Penn, and MIT, because I think there's a wide gulf between the so-called elite colleges and any of the state schools, for example, or the smaller regional schools that we might be able to talk about. But let's take a strong look at the Penns, the Harvards, the MITs of the world. Should they care what their Jewish students are saying about feeling unsafe?
Yeah, I think so.
And here's where it gets interesting, because when called before Congress and asked whether these chants, right, the sorts of things that these students are saying, violated the university's code of conduct, they all fell back to this, well, it's contextual.
What does that mean? I mean, I know what contextual means. What do they mean by it?
Well, they mean that it might not violate our code of conduct, that maybe it's perfectly acceptable for them to be chanting death to the Jews, death to Israel. Maybe that's fine.
Well, but hang on. I think there's an easy test here. The easy test is if you can take out that noun, Jews, and replace it with something else. Blacks, for example. Now is it a problem?
Let's go a step further, Ant. Let's take out Jews and put in transgenders.
Yeah.
Because that's been all the rage, right? And I don't think that that kind of behavior is going to be acceptable for even half a second on any of those campuses. And here's why I keep saying this is really interesting. Because apparently saying something like death to the Jews might be contextually acceptable, but for the last 10 years or so, maybe more, we've been told that there's the thing called a microaggression.
Right.
Do you remember?
Right.
Do you remember being trained at Duquesne on the evils of microaggressions?
Actually, thank God I avoided all of that nonsense.
That's like a miracle, right? I myself have been through many microaggression trainings in which I was told that saying certain things in a certain way, even if I never intended them to be aggressive, are in fact aggressive. Even if no rational person would think they were aggressive, if the hearer of such messages thinks they were aggressive, that's good enough. And the speaker of such things is open to punishment at the university if someone thinks those things that came out of his mouth were offensive to the hearer of such things. And you can see how we're down a rabbit hole there. The minute that we decide that anybody can decide that anything was offensive and we don't have to have any sort of rational standard to apply, just the feelings of the aggrieved. As long as we're there, well, everything is offensive all the time to everyone.
Except if you're a person who's not in a particularly favored classification, like apparently Jews are.
That's right. And that's where I think these university presidents fall headlong into an open pit, right? Because they already have a standard. And the standard is anyone who feels offended is definitionally aggrieved.
Yeah, and they built this standard themselves.
That's right. That's exactly what they did. And now, when it's being applied to them for something else that they never would have said met the standard, now they're tripping all over themselves to find some reason that they might declare this behavior inappropriate. And they can't do it. They literally can't do it. Well, I have a solution for them. Come out in favor of free speech, regardless of whose feelings might be hurt by it.
Right.
I mean, are you telling me that somebody who's had a privileged life, a life privileged enough to land him in Harvard, that he can't take an insult? You've got to be kidding me. Because we've only got two options here, right? Either we regulate speech all the way down, or we don't regulate it at all.
Well, I think they very much want that third option, but they don't have the gumption to say it out loud. And that third option is some people get protected, other people don't.
Yeah, call it exactly what it is. Your speech is free and protected as long as you don't say anything we don't like, which definitionally means your speech is neither free nor protected.
Right.
That's where we are. And in the end, I think you only have the two options, because that middle way always deteriorates into no free speech. So if you have free speech, you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that people are going to say things you don't like. And you're going to have to say, I will defend your right to say those things, even if I don't like you.
Yeah, and I like that very much. I often call people on the carpet who claim they're for free speech. I don't believe you're for free speech until I see you defending someone saying something that you don't like.
I think that's exactly right. And I don't see much of anybody who I would think is really in favor of free speech in American universities. That's not to say there aren't any. There are some, but I don't see many.
I agree with that. My experience over the past 15, 20 years has been this environment in academia where you have to be extremely careful about what you say and how you say it. Right down to, when I'm teaching statistics and I'm giving examples, and if the example involves a person, I'll do everything I can to avoid saying he or she because someone somewhere might get offended, and that's going to cause all sorts of problems.
And it causes problems in other ways too, right? If you're giving an example, do you say, Jose went to the store? Or is that offensive? Or do you say Joe went to the store? Or is that offensive? I can't keep up with what's offensive.
Right.
And I don't think much anybody else can either. And we're into this twilight where literally everything out of your mouth can be construed as offensive by someone from this or that groups who you may never have heard of, which is interesting, right? Because it would seem that being insulting is a willful act. You have to mean it, or you have to have shirked your duty of learning basic things very, very badly. I think people can be unwittingly offensive. Those people tend not to really realize what the is going on in American life. But when we're talking about things like this, when you're looking at calls for genocide, and you've got university presidents tripping all over each other to find a way to say that that's not against our code of conduct. And we all know that 100 different microaggressions are, those code of conducts make no sense to anybody at all. And it would seem to me that this is a very easy thing to fix. All you have to do is come out and say, well, we're in favor of free speech, and when we don't like the speech, that just means we don't like the speech. It doesn't mean you can't say it. Now, I think there is a subcategory here, and if what you're saying is an incitement to violence, maybe there can be an exception, right? So if we can rationally and honestly conclude that a bunch of wingnuts calling for the genocide of the Jews on a Harvard campus, if that is, in fact, likely to incite violence, then no, they can't say it. I don't know a rational person in the world who wouldn't say that. We're left with the question, what's the big problem here? And I think the big problem is the people who would design speech codes in the first place. There's your problem. Look at what they can be against and look at what they can't be against and ask yourself, does any of that pass the smell test?
People have complained to me before about this sort of thing, particularly going on in academia. And they throw up their hands and they say, well, the world's just going to hell. Look at this sort of thing. And this gets entrenched in academia. It's never going to go away. My response is, if you maintain two or more things that are logically incompatible, just let the person run with it, because eventually the person's going to melt down. They're going to reach a place, as we've seen here, where these things just cannot be maintained together anymore. And at some point, that person's going to have to back off one or the other of them and say, no, I was wrong about this. A, I actually believe in B, or vice versa.
I mean, the thing I worry about is this nonsense of campus speech codes in the first place, right? Because there have been a lot of victims of these things. People have been taken out back and shot over these speech codes, both faculty and students alike. What about them? It's all well and good to say that these things will conflict over the long term and will be forced to reconcile the things that don't add up together. But what do we tell the people who are victimized?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, now there's no answer at all. And I don't think we should sit back and watch people suffer this way for this foolishness. And this is world-class foolishness. When I brought this up, you said, well, you didn't have to go to any in-service training about speech codes and this kind of thing. And isn't that interesting that they have to do it at Harvard, but they don't have to do it at Duquesne?
Well, they may well have to do it now, but I haven't done any of it.
It's interesting to me where you see this and where you don't.
Yeah, and there I agree with you.
The more elite the institution is, the more likely you are to find this. Where are you not going to see this? At hyphenated state schools, for example, at small liberal arts colleges, you're going to see something, but it's never going to be at the same level. Why not? Well, the market works. The market will determine who your student body is going to be and whether they will put up with this or not.
What interests me here, and you haven't talked much about it, is how did we get to the point that Congress actually did the right thing and called these people on the carpet?
Oh, I don't know that Congress did the right thing at all. This is the case of a MAGA Republican sensing blood in the water and going for the jugular of these three women when they showed up. Never think that Congress did the right thing.
So this was not principled, it was partisan. It just happened to have the same outcome that a principled endeavor would.
Well, I don't know if even that's true, right? Because nobody came out to talk about whether speech should be free at a college. Right? It never seemed to be on anybody's mind, which is disgusting, but not terribly surprising.
Yeah, not surprising that once again people are talking about the outcome, not the principle. It's the principle that drives all of this, but somehow nobody's concerned about that.
I hate to say no one, but boy, it's close to no one, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It would seem that we should begin this conversation by asking, how free can speech in fact be here in the real world? We've already come up with the incitement doctrine, right? That came up in the course of a rational conversation about speech being free. If it incites to violence in the here and now, you've got a problem. We're going to have to rein that in. Does that mean that there's nothing else? Is that the only way that we would curtail free speech? It might mean that. There might be another way or two, but at the very least, you see that there is a principled reason to curtail free speech. Mm-hmm. Why didn't I hear this conversation? Why didn't three elite college presidents, why didn't they show up talking about this? That I don't know. What I do know is that when the University of Pennsylvania's president, Liz McGill, talked about how this is all contextual, she sat there with this smirk on her face the entire time. And it was deeply offensive. Anybody who saw her would have been deeply offended by it, unless you're on the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. And it's not surprising to me that she's the one who doesn't have a job now. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time, be sure to follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. Join Words and Numbers Backstage, the Facebook group where the conversation continues, and
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Until next week, try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Just one. And who knows, it may turn into a trend. Give it a shot. You might feel good about yourself.
You could say you tried.
You tried, that's right. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.